So at the end of the film Ford vs Ferrari or Le Mans 1966, depending on which region you live in, Ken Miles is with his son at Riverside Raceway, and he says to him in that Birmingham accent of his, "Somewhere out there is the perfect lap. Every corner, every gear change, perfect." About 15 years later, that perfect lap was achieved by a German who has taken the motor racing world by storm. This German was 26 years old at the time of that lap. Stefan Bellof was his name, and he'd been making a name for himself in sports cars and open wheelers, but it was in Porsche's Group C endurance program that he was really making some noise. Now, Group C is a whole nother topic in itself. I did do a full video on it back in the days when the channel had a more rock and roll image. I called the video More Sound Monsters or something like that, but it's maybe worth revisiting again at some point. Maybe do the whole fall of Group C, because that's pretty interesting, but I'll get round to it. There's still plenty to talk about. I mean, I hope. I need a content stream here. The Group C cars were in a trifecta of what can only be called insanity in the 1980s. You had Group C Endurance, Group B Rally, and the turbos in Formula 1 that were just getting more and more powerful. Group C did last the longest out of the three, however. Group B was abruptly ended after the death of Henry Toivonen at the Corsica Rally in 1986. F1's turbos were turned down and ditched in 1989, but Group C carried on into the 1990s, dying with a whimper when nobody turned up to the 1992 World Sports Car Race at Manicourt. Porsche, Mercedes, Mazda, Jaguar, Ford, Nissan, Peugeot and Toyota all had an entry. And these cars were running at Le Mans when it had no chicanes on the Mulsanne, so top speeds were approaching 240 miles an hour in a straight line. Peugeot went as far as to design a car with the sole purpose of breaking the 400 km/h mark, or 250 miles an hour in old money, which resulted in those chicanes being put on the Mulsanne straight. But it wasn't just Le Mans that these cars were running at, because they would go to another track, probably the most dangerous track this side of the Isle of Man, the Nurburgring. And we're not talking the modern Grand Prix circuit. That hadn't been built yet. In fact, at the time this story takes place, the new Grand Prix circuit was being built so that Formula 1 could return to the historic venue. Basically, they had removed the North Loop that you might know from playing Grand Prix Legends, and basically shortcutted that whole bit out so it's the layout you now know from things like Assetto Corsa, R-Factor 2 and iRacing. As a result, the circuit length dropped from 14 miles to just under 13, meaning that every lap was going to be slightly quicker than normal. But either way, the rest of the track was the same green hell that Jackie Stewart put in his hero drive in 1968 to win by 4 minutes, and also the same green hell that James Hunt won at in 1976 while Niki Lauda's Ferrari burned, almost taking Niki with it. Those cars at that track must have been terrifying, and I'm well aware that I'm looking at this through 2023 eyes, but still, it was a very different time, clearly. So, Bellof. His weapon that had been given to him by Porsche that year was the 956, a car that would dominate the French roads. And that year at Le Mans, 1983, Porsche would take 9 of the top 10 positions at Le Mans, resulting in the infamous Nobody's Perfect advertising campaign. Now for some technical specifications. This is the part where I'd show a 3D model and sort of get some close-ups and things like that, but I can't find a model for Assetto Corsa that has, well, basically a non-history of being ripped or converted from somewhere else, or at least have some sort of dodgy history attached to it, so I'll do what I can. I mean, I wish I could just put any random image up, but copyright's a thing, isn't it? It was a car ahead of the game. It produced so much downforce using mostly ground effect that Porsche has it in their museum hanging upside down to show off how much it had compared to everybody else. Porsche also tested the Doppelkupplungsgetriebe dual clutch gearbox in the car in the early 80s, and it was powered by a turbocharged flat 6 good enough for 225 miles an hour at Le Mans. Problem is, using ground effect at somewhere like the Nordschleife is tricky because the track is so bumpy and undulating. Bellof's co-driver Derek Bell struggled to keep the car on the track, and every time he went through the carousel he had to hang on for dear life. Bellof, however, had no such issues. So when qualifying came around, he had to go out and beat Jochen Mass's time of 6:16.8, which was already a pretty rapid time. But Bellof's car was ever so slightly different to the one driven by Mass and Ix. His car had got a couple of upgrades, such as new 13-inch wheels on the front, had more camber on the front wheels available, and also had a better steering rack. There were a couple of other minor changes on top of this that made the car a little better when it came to actually turning the car into a corner. That day was also quite cold, so the track was going to be quick, so long as he could get the temperature into the tyres, which on the Nurburgring, yeah, that's probably quite easy to do. I don't know, I'm not a racing driver. Also in this race was reigning Formula 1 champion Keke Rosberg, father of Monaco-based YouTuber and one of 3 people to beat Lewis Hamilton in equal machinery, Nico. Keke was also in a 956, albeit a customer one, and he had set a lap that he was happy with. He'd set a 6:39.5. Now, if this had been a 1:16 versus a 1:39, you'd probably scratch your head as to how slow Keke was here, but since it's the Nurburgring, that time difference isn't as big as it looks. So Bellof went out and really took advantage of the cooler conditions and ragged the living daylights out of his 956 to go 5 seconds quicker than Mass and a whopping half a minute faster than Rosberg. The time was a 6:11.1. On the Dirtinger Hoa straight, which is the big long straight on the Nordschleife, he was able to get a toe off another Rothmans 956, which added to the top speed, therefore faster lap time. But either way, still an incredible lap to set. And reading on how Bellof drove cars, it was almost as if he was driving these sports cars like they were open wheelers. But in the process, he'd managed to basically set that perfect lap that Ken Miles was talking about at the end of Ford versus Ferrari. And because the fastest class car that can run on the Nordschleife competitively today is a GT3, the likelihood of Bellof's record being broken are very, very low. Unless Porsche was to take a modified prototype there to see how fast it will go. During the race, however, the pole time was all for nothing. Bellof stormed off into a massive lead at the start of the race, but was burning too much fuel and was not going to slow down. Bell did his stint that allowed the other cars to catch up, and when Bellof got back into the car, he set about increasing that lead again. But then he crashed at Flantsgarden, which today is named the Bellof S in his honour. What had happened was Porsche had told Bellof it was impossible to go through there flat out with the high fuel and the setup the car had. Bellof said hold my beer and tried to prove the engineers wrong, but stacked it at 140 miles an hour trying to prove that point. It was a total downer on what had been the weekend he'd achieved racing immortality. After doing a lap where he dropped the jaws of a Formula 1 world champion, Jackie Ickx, Jochen Mass and Hans Stuck. And the rest of the motorsport world for that matter. But unfortunately, Bellof's potential would never be achieved. Hotly touted as Germany's first F1 world champion, as Von Trips had been, he was involved in an accident at Spa in 1985, during a time where he split his racing between Formula 1 and sports cars. He tried to overtake Jackie Ickx at Eau Rouge and ended up in the wall, and didn't get to walk away, dying at the age of 27. There's stories that he was in talks to sign with Ferrari where, who knows, he might have achieved something. After his death, it would be 9 years before Germany finally got a world champion. A world champion that had Bellof as his hero. In the 1984 Monaco Grand Prix, he was lapping faster than both Prost and Senna before the red flag came, in a Tyrrell that was kicked out of the championship because of the whole lead shot controversy. Bellof is one of those drivers who had absolute raw pace, but didn't really know when it was time to slow down. The only way his Nurburgring lap record would be broken was by heavily modifying a prototype to not be race legal. He is still, to this day, the king of the ring. So then, a look at the time Stefan Bellof achieved racing immortality, even if he was partially held up by a Porsche 911 while doing that lap. If this has been new to you and you've learned something here today, then do give the video a thumb up, and if you want more stuff from the motorsport history books, click subscribe, get that bell on, so you never miss out on anything I do around here. Massive thanks to the kind folk at Patreon for the support, and if you want to help out with buying images for these videos and stuff like that, you can join the people on screen by heading to the link in the description, as well as finding links to my socials down there as well. Well, there's super thanks if you just want to do a one-off donation. Maybe I should turn the channel memberships on too. Is that something that people would be interested in? But anyway, this has been a video, and I've been Ada Millward. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all again soon for another of these videos. Goodbye.